Hi everyone, now we're going to demonstrate how to take a visual that we've produced in 3ds Max and Vray and stitch that into the professional photograph that we've had produced. So we're going to save it as a PNG because it cuts the background out. Drop the Pro Photo into Photoshop, and then we've saved the render to our desktop. So just take it from the desktop and drop it into Photoshop. Doesn't look like it's appeared yet. Oh, it's still saving. Generally we save PNGs as lossless to keep the quality, but as a result of that it's a big file size, particularly when rendering over 8,000 pixels as well, so it's just going to take some time to save. You can see there at the bottom the rendering time was only just under 17 minutes as well. And that is to do with the quality of the computers we use, but it's also to do with the simplicity of the model. Again, if you try and split it between your rendering and your photoshopping, you can keep your render times down. If we went mental with trying to add so much detail into the render, then our render times would grow exponentially. Okay, so that's now saved, so you can see it there, exterior viz. Drop that into Photoshop. And we just drop that in. Just hit yes and OK for those things. Doesn't really have an effect. We held, sorry, I should say that I held Shift and drag as well, so it centers on the thing that you're dropping it onto. And then what we're going to do is just work around the edge of the proposal using the marquee tool. Set the feather to 0 for now. Okay, a little bit of a slow start there, but we've got it now. Just work your way around the perimeter of the proposal in order to cut out the context. There we go, just hit delete there. As always with these tutorials, these aren't textbook tutorials, these are how we do it. So I'm sure there's a slicker way of cutting the context out, but again, we're just about, in this instance, we're just trying to get it as, trying to get the visual done as quickly as possible. When you're working to deadlines, sometimes you've got to overlook the textbook and just get it done. So just clip the remainder of the context out using the marquee tool. Just go beyond the border to make sure. Okay. So we've removed all the excess. Then what we want to do is the things that we know that are going to be in the foreground, we want to create a duplicate of that from the photograph layer. So you can see then that our proposal sits behind certain elements in the scene, particularly those light streaks. It's one reason why we get Pro Photos commissioned. I wouldn't have a clue how to get those light streaks with a photograph. So now what we're doing is just applying some perspective lines. If you take those perspective lines, I've just made sure that it's on the uppermost layer as well. If you take those perspective lines using neighbouring buildings, you can then compare how the perspective's working on your visual. So you can see straight away the eaves line of our building is nowhere near. So you want to use the transform handles to get them as close as you can. And we're not going to get it perfect first time, but as we work into it, we will match those perspective lines. So it's just checking then how that foreground duplicate is affecting the visual. See, so we're still nowhere near the street line. So again, Control T for transform. We're actually just going to drag it down just to get the height right, and then using the handles in the corner to get the perspective of the proposal a little bit more accurate. Okay, so again, Control T. Sorry, I was a little bit distracted by that email there. Okay, so you can see now we've got a gap with the transform, and the fact that we've deleted the context, you can see some gaps there. So just using the clone stamp tool to just fill those gaps. So Alt and click to find your source, and then just paint in the areas that we need to fill. And I've actually just jumped to the brush tool here just to fill that last bit in. By the time we're done with the shot, you'll never notice that bit. So again, just clipping the excess out. Now I've just gone over the end of the balustrade in there, so we're just gonna paint that back in, like so. Again, you can just see there at the bottom, just got a little bit too heavy-handed, so just got to get that roof line spot on. And again, use the marquee tool to delete the excess. Okay. So far, so good. You can see that the perspective's still a little bit off. Now this would have took some time matching it in 3ds Max, so my personal preference is to capture this in Photoshop. So now that we've got the general perspective right, what you can then do is you can make duplicates of certain areas of the proposal. So then what I'm doing here is I've duplicated just that lower level, just these two near side windows, and then just using the rulers to line the windows up with those above, so it still looks convincing. Okay, so that looks about right. So you can see there, we're just using that ruler to trim the edge of that brickwork off. So now, just by adjusting those two windows, the overall perspective's looking a lot better. So if we just clear those guides, you can see, just turn that layer on and off, you can just see how effective that is. Now we want to use that technique to finish off the remainder of the ground floor. So Control T, using those handles. And you can afford to actually pull that over a bit because you've got brickwork on that outer edge. So that existing brickwork behind the duplicate is actually doing us a bit of a favour there. Okay, then if we turn on that foreground overlay we created earlier, set the hardness to 25%, and you can actually just use the, sorry, wrong layer, you can then just use the eraser to start to blend in those foreground elements, and again particularly the light streaks. You want to make sure that those light streaks are staying. It'll actually help bed the proposal into the photograph. So you can see already that's starting to look more convincing. Then I've just duplicated those layers so I can merge them turned off the originals just in case we need to refer back to them. You can see there, just messing with the contrast. Generally speaking, V-Ray renders come out super under contrasted, so we need to make sure that we add that contrast back in, and again mess with the color balance. You can see that the scene's generally quite blue, so we just added some blues into our visual. And then using the dodge tool, you can actually boost the glow coming from the windows, and that refers back to the previous tutorial where in this instance we've chose not to, just for the sake of speed, we've chose not to model anything behind those windows, so the brighter you can make them, the more convincing they look with the absence of furniture and detail behind. So then we're just jumping back onto the foreground elements, and we've just set the opacity of the eraser down to 50%. So we've got a bit of a bigger margin for error, and it just creates a little bit of transparency on the foreground, so it looks as if those light streaks are genuinely sat in front of our building. Then if we just have a little mess with the curves tool, again just to boost that contrast, and then the burn tool just gives that sense that the building's been there for the last few years. If you just burn the edges, just creates that little element of dirt around the edges where it's in contact with either the street or its neighbours. Okay, so now that we've done some tweaks to how the proposal is sitting within the scene, we're just going to make sure that there's no part of the image that's letting the whole side down. So just making sure that none of the proposal is interfering with the context. So you can see there, just slightly overhanging the neighbouring building. Now, because the photograph was taken at a 2-point perspective, all vertical lines are pretty true, so you can just use the square marquee tool there to catch some of the clashes with the edges of the building. Just tidying it up, and you can see when you set it to full screen, gives you a sense of how it would look to the user. Sometimes you can get too obsessed with zooming into 200%. Now we've just set the feather to the marquee to 1 pixel, so that when we're deleting the edges off, it's got a soft edge to it. Just helps it blend in with the surroundings. So just get rid of that little nick there. Now using the dodge tool, we can add, or we can boost the reflections of the metallic cladding. Just give it a little sheen at the corners, particularly where the direction of light's coming from. We know the direction of light's coming from the right hand side, where all the street lighting is. So you can see there, just adding a little bit of light to the corners of the bronze cladding. Just set it into the scene that bit more. Something that we could have captured in V-Ray, but I think you've got much more control when doing it in Photoshop. As you can see there, just working our way around the visual, just to make sure that the edges are highlighted. Now we're just checking the street scene to actually use the building opposite as the reflections in the glass. So that's the building opposite. If we then take a print screen of this Google Street View, now we know the camera's on a certain angle, so we want to take the inverse angle from Google Street, which is roughly that. We take a print screen and then we just paste it in. Take some of the excess off, obviously all the labeling and what have you, and then just use the transform tool and the handles at the corner just to mess with the perspective. Just try and get the vertical lines as true as possible. Increase the height, and then take a square cut of that adjustment. Control T, flip horizontal, obviously because it's a mirrored reflection. And if you just roughly position it over the windows, set the blend mode to overlay, and you can see there now they're starting to create some reflections in the glass. Just make sure the perspective's spot on. Any one mistake can let the whole image down, so make sure to double and triple check. See there, just those vertical lines on the reflection. Just needed that last little bit of tweaking. Position it as so, and then go in and create a layer mask. So then we can start to cut out the windows. So we click on the layer mask and then do a full black fill. It then hides the whole image. And then you could either paint in using a white paint onto the mask, so that it will reveal the reflection, or in this instance it's more appropriate to use the marquee tool, or the lasso tool I should say. If you then select those two windows and then fill using a white fill, that then reveals that portion of the reflection that we've created from Google Street. That was obviously too harsh, so we've just dropped the opacity there, make it look a bit more realistic. And then what we're going to do is we're just going to work our way through the remaining windows and filling them back in with the layer mask selected, filling it back in with a white colouring. Obviously layer masks work to a white and a black for removal and white for adding back in. So we're just working our way around with the lasso tool. Just the inside face of the frame of the windows. We'll catch that brick in a sec. So if you fill them in, you can see those reflections are looking really convincing now. So then just repeat that process throughout the remaining windows. Can get a little bit tedious, but needs must. Thankfully this isn't too big of a job. Same again, just work your way through the windows. Doesn't have to be ultra perfect. Got to remember that the viewer's looking at it at 100%, not 200%. 9 times out of 10, it's not going to be an expert eye looking at it either, so there's a little bit of room for error. Okay, that's that floor done. Paint bucket, fill it in white, and just turn the layer on and off just to check the impact. Now the good thing using a layer mask is we can make changes quite quickly without deleting any content. Obviously the glass balustrade will have a reflection, and then we can just fill in the rest of that window. Same again there, using the balustrade as a guide. Okay. Same again, fill in white. It's looking good. The overlay blend mode as well, always it actually boosts contrast, so it will enhance the sort of glow that's coming from the windows, which will do us no harm. Now with these windows being arched at the head, we're going to just bypass the central mullions and transoms. Oh, sorry, just turn off all layers there. There we go. And then we can come back and add those frames back in by changing the paint colour to black from white. So as you can see, I'm not being too precious with the archways there. Just catching that top light to the bin store. And then finishing it off with the last two arched windows. You can see that our selection mode is the second one in. If you look at the top left of the screen, selecting that means that it adds to the selection. Just makes it a little bit quicker. Now we've just flipped from white to black, and then using the marquee tool, we can then catch the vertical framing, which at the minute is showing a reflection, which obviously it shouldn't. There we go. Paint bucket, black. Sorry, for some reason it didn't paint them all, so we're just going to have to do them individually. Control Alt Z brings those back into play. If you've hit deselect, and then just using the eraser, just going to catch the last little bit of reflection there. You can just see there the blanking panels. That's catching the ground floor to the building. Cause the site's on a slope, we've had to set the ground floor at the highest point, but it's allowed us to put some basement rooms in, which the client was pretty happy with. Okay, there you go. So that's the reflections in the glass sorted. Maybe boost them a little bit, 40%. You can mess with the brightness and contrast just to make them look a little bit more realistic. Just set the blend mode back to normal and 100% opacity, just so we can understand what we're amending, because obviously this is a night scene, but the Google Street reflection was from the day, so we want to just mimic that reflection as it would be seen at night. So we're just increasing the light coming from the windows using the dodge tool. Pop that back to overlay, and you can see it's just made that reflection look that bit more convincing. Okay, back on the proposal now. We're just gonna boost the glow from those windows. Look at that, just a bit more warmth. Generally we try and make sure that our proposals look warmer than the neighbours, just so it looks a little bit more inviting. Now you notice a couple of discrepancies in the model there. There's a partition that's hitting the glass, which we'll need to pick up back in the base Revit model, but for the purpose of the CGI we can just copy the window beside it, pop that over the top, and it just hides that error. Same with the one below. Just use the lasso tool to catch the window beside it. Either use Control C, Control V or Control J for duplicate. Okay. Merge those, there's no need for those window layers to be loose. Then what we want to do is we want to disguise that brick, because it wouldn't be a brick finish internally. So then we're going to use the whole window to the side, sorry, to the left hand side, and then we're going to just use the transform handles to get that window in position. As I say, it doesn't have to be perfect, just has to be convincing. So that's good. And with the reflection being over the top, even though we're using duplicates, the reflection is making each window look unique. So there's no need to go to town on making each of these windows look completely individual. So same again. Control T. Get that lined up. Like so. Perfect. Merge those layers. And maybe just create a little bit of variety between rooms, making the odd window a little bit brighter than the one beside it. Just make those basement windows look a little bit brighter. Those rooms will be called the sleepers. Okay, again, just mess with the colour balance, just to make sure that it sits comfortably on the base photograph. Like I said, we like to add a bit of warmth, but it is a night scene after all, so we're just gonna not go too crazy with the yellows. Okay, it's getting there. Now I've just made a new layer. I'm going to pick the sky and set the blend mode to soft light, just so we can add a few brush strokes of colour to our building, so that it's got just little hints of blue that'll just help marry it through with the background image. So you can just see there, just that little bit of blue in the corner just makes it sit more comfortably. Again, just round the top. That's obviously the roof of the building is the thing that's merging with the sky, so we're going to make sure that that's just got some blue hints to it. And again, lasso tool, set the feather to 2 pixels in this instance. And just work your way around the outer edge of the roof. And then when we get to delete that, it'll have a soft edge to it, so it just sits more comfortably with the base image. Otherwise it would just be too harsh of a contrast and it would look obvious. So you work your way around there, make sure you're on the right layer, delete that, and look at that. Starting to look really convincing now. And we're just going to try that trick around the edge as well. When you completely zoom into the image, you'll notice that there's a tiny bit of blur on the base image as well. So if we can just apply that blur to the edge of our visual at the point at which it merges with the photograph or connects with the photograph, just makes it look a little bit more realistic. And just a little bit more burn. Now the purpose of that was just to mimic the shadowing from the neighbouring tree. Maybe a bit more contrast. We want our image, so we want our proposal to stand out, but not overly so that it looks false. So a little bit more contrast, so that we can afford to drop the saturation a little bit. Then Control-Alt-E just merges the visible layers so that we can then use the camera raw filter to edit the image as a whole. This finishing touch just brings it all together. You see there, just drop the temperature. It's a night scene, so could drop the temperature. Or we could warm it up a touch and then add that. Again, I always like to add a little bit of a purple tint in Camera Raw. Drop the blacks there just to introduce a bit more contrast. And there we are. Jump into Lens Correction Custom just to add a bit of vignette. Perfect. And save it off as a JPEG, exterior shot. Leave it on, optimized. Oh, sorry. Nope, didn't mean that. Undo. We're still working to 8,000 pixels. So let's just do a save as, call it for web. Let that finish off. It's a big file. Okay. And then just jump into image, image size, change the resolution to 4,000 pixels. And then save it off as JPEG. And you'll see there you've got a bit more of a sensible file size. Have it as optimized, 10 quality, and then it allows you to email that to the client then. Give it a little check, and there we are. There's our finished visual. Thanks for watching.